The Forbidden Witness. Versão longa, narrativa, pronta para voice-over. There are stories in true crime that feel incomplete, cases that end too abruptly, verdicts that raise more questions than they answer, and reports where entire paragraphs have been blacked out with ink so thick that it looks almost deliberate. Tonight's investigation is one of those stories. This is a case that senior detectives refuse to touch, the case that new officers weren't allowed to talk about, and the case that, according to internal memos, must not be reopened under any circumstances. It began as a normal homicide, a victim, a suspect, a witness, but what turned this case into a forbidden subject wasn't the brutality of the crime. It was what the only surviving witness claimed to have seen. Something so unnerving that the department filed a testimony under a restricted designation normally reserved for national security cases. And yet, years later, pieces of that testimony leaked. Not officially, not through the media, but through anonymous detectives who broke silence behind closed doors, men and women who said the same thing. We weren't banned from discussing the crime. We were banned from describing the killer. In this documentary, we will examine the statements that were erased, the evidence removed from the original case files, and the terrifying consistency between every forbidden detail. Because the witness didn't describe a man. She described something else. A figure that moved wrong. A presence that knew too much. And a face, if you can call it that no report was allowed to include. Detectives tried to bury the truth. The department threatened anyone who spoke. But the witness's original testimony survived in fragments. Tonight, for the first time, we'll attempt to reconstruct a version of events they didn't want the world to hear. This is the story of the Forbidden Witness, and what the detectives were banned from saying about the killer, the crime scene they tried to rewrite. The official report begins at 4:12 a.m. on a cold, windless night in early November. According to the documents, at least the parts that survived redaction, 2 patrol officers responded to a noise complaint in a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. But the word noise doesn't capture what neighbors described. They spoke of something else entirely. A scream that didn't sound human. A vibration in the walls. A sudden collapse of power in 3 houses simultaneously. None of these details appear in the final police file. The location was a modest 2-story house belonging to 53-year-old Daniel Harrow, an accountant with no criminal record and nothing that would make him a target, at least publicly. But by the time officers entered the home, the scene was unlike anything standard homicide training could prepare them for. Inside the living room, the furniture had been pushed aside as if by force, but without any pattern of struggle. No overturned chairs, no chaotic footprints, no signs of fight. It looked instead like the room had shifted. One of the first responders, speaking anonymously years later, described it like this. It was as if everything had been moved at once. Not thrown, not smashed, just relocated. The victim, Daniel, was found lying in the center of the room, but his body didn't show the expected signs of blunt force trauma or stabbing wounds. Instead, investigators noted a complete absence of blood, and yet the man was undeniably dead. There were no bruises, no cuts, no ligature marks, nothing the human I could understand. A paramedic later said that it looked like the life had been taken out of him without touching him. That line was never allowed into any official transcript. The most disturbing part, however, was Daniel's face. Not damaged, not mutilated, just wrong. Detectives would later say, in off-the-record interviews, that the victim's expression was one they had never seen before. Not fear, not pain, more like recognition. As if he had seen something he remembered, not something unfamiliar, something he had been waiting for. And that expression was the detail that, reportedly, higher authorities ordered removed from every account of the scene. But there was one more anomaly. A woman hiding inside the house. A neighbor? A friend? A relative? No, someone who shouldn't have been there at all. Her name was Elena Ward, 28 years old, a school teacher with no connection to the victim. She was found sitting behind a half-open pantry door, knees to her chest, shaking so violently that the responding officer could barely coax her out. Elena wasn't injured. She wasn't restrained. But she was unable to speak, her throat clenched, eyes unfocused, lips trembling. Yet one note in the early incident log stands out. Elena gestures repeatedly toward the hallway, points with urgency, refuses to enter living room, repeats one phrase, "It's still here." That phrase would never appear again. When detectives took over the scene an hour later, the entire tone of the case changed. Commanders arrived unusually fast. Unmarked vehicles rolled in before daylight, and officers were told, under no uncertain terms, to hand over their body cams and remain silent about anything they had seen. Later, one patrolman admitted, "We thought it was a home invasion. They treated it like a national threat." But the biggest irregularity came next. Before the body was moved, before forensic analysis began, before even the crime scene photographs were processed, Elena Ward was taken away by plainclothes officers who refused to identify themselves, who did not sign her into custody, and who did not file any documentation of where she was taken. She would later reappear, but not in any way the detectives expected. For now, her disappearance marked the first indication that this case would be handled differently, that something or someone was dictating what could and could not be recorded. By sunrise, half the scene had been sanitized. Evidence had been collected by people outside the department, and several sections of the house had been scanned with equipment the officers did not recognize. One detective, who tried to object, said he was told, "Do your job, let them do theirs." When he asked who they were, the response was a cold, simple, "You don't have clearance." But the part that truly bothered the team came later, when a rookie forensic tech made a discovery that should have changed the entire direction of the investigation. She found footprints, not shoes, not bare feet, something in between, elongated, narrow, and slightly uneven, as if the pressure points didn't match a human arch. She called her supervisor immediately. Within minutes, the prints were removed, not photographed, not measured, not even documented, erased. When she insisted on filing a report, the lead investigator told her, "You didn't see those." And the rookie replied, voice trembling, "But they were still warm." That statement alone should have triggered a full department review. Instead, it triggered something else, total suppression, because whatever left those footprints was not found in the house. And yet, several officers insisted they felt it lingering in the air, heavy, watchful, as if the crime scene itself was aware of their presence. The case would only grow stranger from here, because the only person who knew what entered that house that night was Elena Ward. And when she finally spoke, what she described was so disturbing that detectives were banned, not advised, not cautioned, banned from repeating a single detail. The forbidden witness speaks. For the first 48 hours after crime, Elena Ward remained unreachable. Not medically unreachable, not psychologically unreachable, simply inaccessible, because no one in law enforcement, not even the lead detective on the case, was told where she had been taken. The detectives were informed that the witness was under evaluation. No name, no facility, no timeline. But on the morning of the third day, an unmarked sedan rolled into the precinct. 2 men stepped out, neither wearing badges, neither stating credentials, and simply said, "She'll talk now." Elena was ushered into a small, windowless interview room with low lighting and a single recording camera mounted in the corner. The detectives watching her through the two-way mirror were shocked by her condition. She wasn't sedated. She wasn't restrained. But she looked hollow, like someone who had spent the last 2 nights reliving something she wished she could erase. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from staying awake too long. Her hands never stopped trembling, and she flinched at every sound, even the soft click of the door closing. The lead detective, Michael Graves, started the interview gently. "Elena, you're safe now. We just need to understand what happened inside the house." At first, she couldn't answer. Her lips moved without producing sound. Graves tried again. "You were with Daniel Harrow that night. We need to know why." She shook her head slowly. No, I wasn't," she whispered. "I didn't even know him. I had never been inside that house before." That statement alone contradicted early suspicions. If she wasn't a friend, relative, or partner, then why had she been there? So Graves pressed. Elena, we found you inside the pantry. Hiding. If you didn't know the victim, how did you end up in his home? She swallowed hard. I was pulled in. Graves froze. Pulled in by who? But Elena shook her head again, tears slowly forming. Not who. A long silence filled the room. Then, barely audible, she added, by what? The detectives exchanged glances through the glass. This was not the confession of a killer. It was a testimony of someone who had seen something they couldn't explain, even to themselves. Graves leaned forward, voice steady. Elena, what entered that house? She looked up slowly, her gaze unfocused, as if watching something behind him rather than him. It didn't enter, she whispered. It was already inside. The room shifted. Every detective listening felt a cold weight settle on their chest. Graves tried to clarify. You mean Daniel was hiding from someone inside the house? No, she said. He was talking to it. The detective stiffened. Graves continued carefully. Elena, who was he talking to? She exhaled sharply, her voice suddenly cracking. It wasn't a person. Her hands moved instinctively to her ears, pressing hard as if trying to block out memory. I couldn't see it at first, she said, but I heard it. It wasn't speaking a language. It wasn't even speaking. She looked directly into the camera for the first time. It was remembering. Graves blinked. What do you mean? Remembering what? She shook her head violently. No, not remembering its memories. Remembering ours. Like it was going through us. Rifling through us. Her breath became shallow, ragged. Daniel tried to tell me to run, she said. He kept saying it wasn't finished with him yet, that it needed something from him. What did it need? Graves asked. Elena's response was quiet and immediate. A shape. The room fell silent. Graves fruned. A shape? What does that mean? Her voice shifted, becoming distant, like she was describing a nightmare rather than an event. It wasn't complete. It was trying to match itself to us. Copy us. But it could only take fragments. Pieces. She pointed to her head. It was trying to build a human shape using memories. Thoughts. Fears. Faces. The detectives felt a chill. This was beyond delusion. It was structured, specific, consistent. Graves asked the most crucial question. Elena, what did it look like when you finally saw it? Her entire body tensed. And for the first time since the interview began, she refused to speak. She only made a single gesture. She lifted her hand and pointed directly behind Graves. Graves turned instinctively. Of course, nothing was there, but Elena didn't break her stare. Her gaze was fixed on the empty corner of the room. It stood exactly like that, she whispered. No sound, no breath, just watching, like it was waiting for a signal to finish the shape. Graves asked one last time. Elena, what shape was it trying to become? She hesitated, then whispered. It wanted to look like him. Daniel. Graves asked. No. Her voice trembled, like the thing that killed him. The detectives leaned in. Elena, what killed Daniel? And her final answer was a one line that would later be stamped with the words forbidden statement. Do not repeat. It wasn't a killer. It was a replacement. The recording ends abruptly. Not naturally. Not at a convenient pause. The video cuts out mid-frame, as if someone manually terminated the feed. The official log states, interview concluded. But everyone in that building knew the truth. The interview hadn't concluded. It had been shut down. And from that moment on, Elena Ward's testimony became the single most restricted piece of evidence in the case. Because what she described next, the part the detectives were banned from mentioning, would change everything investigators thought they understood about the killer. The killer they couldn't describe. The detectives never expected the interview to end like that. One moment, Elena was trembling, whispering about something that wasn't a man, something that copied people instead of killing them. The next, the feed was cut. The door burst open, and the two unmarked agents who had brought her in stepped inside without a word. They didn't ask permission. They didn't acknowledge the detectives. They simply said, This interview is complete. She is no longer your concern. But Elena wasn't the only thing they took. They removed the recording drive. They deleted the local backup. They took the physical notes out of the lead detective's hands. When Graves protested, one of the men leaned close and said, "If you mention any part of that testimony in any report, you will be removed from the investigation. Do you understand?" It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of procedure. Like reading out a policy everyone should already know. And so, the most important testimony in the case became the one thing detectives weren't allowed to talk about. Not internally. Not in their reports. Not even to each other. But the detectives did talk about it. They talked in whispers. Late at night. In quiet hallways. And every conversation began the same way. What did she mean, replacement? And the truth is, the detectives already had an idea. Because the crime scene itself made no sense. From the moment they arrived at Daniel Harrow's house, they knew the killer wasn't normal, or human, or even physical in the way they understood. Everything about the scene contradicted itself. Footprints that didn't match any known shoe pattern, but also weren't barefoot. They were somewhere in between, blurred, inconsistent, like the weight was shifting incorrectly. Scratch marks on the walls, but not made by metal, wood, or fingernails. The forensic analyst described them as pressure trails, as if something had pressed against the structure of the wall rather than scratching the surface. There were fingerprints, but they were wrong. The ridges didn't form loops, whorls, or arches. They formed patterns, repeating geometric patterns. And then there was the strangest clue of all. Daniel Harrow's body had no defensive wounds. None. He wasn't attacked. He didn't fight. He didn't run. His face, in his final moments, wasn't twisted in pain, or fear, or realization. It looked confused, as if he didn't understand what he was seeing, as if what stood in front of him was trying to become something familiar, but failing over and over again. The detectives didn't know how to interpret any of this. But then something happened that changed the entire direction of the case. 48 hours after the interview shut down, a digital forensics technician contacted Graves privately. He said he found something strange in the corrupted backup copy of the interview room camera feed. The part that wasn't supposed to exist. Not the interview, not Elena, but the room itself. While scrubbing to the footage frame by frame, he noticed that the two-way mirror didn't behave correctly during the last 5 minutes. Reflections weren't reflecting properly. Shadows fell in the wrong directions. Light sources shifted without explanation. Even the shape of the room changed slightly. Objects on the table elongated for a single frame. The corner of the room stretched an inch too far. A chair appeared to tilt even though no one touched it. At first, the technician assumed the footage had been corrupted, but then he found the still frame, a moment captured at exactly 14 minutes into the interview. In that frame, Detective Graves is standing beside Elena Ward. The recording camera is fixed on them. Nothing is out of place, except one detail. In the reflection behind Graves, there's a third figure, standing perfectly still. Tall, undefined, blurry, like a human shape still being constructed. It had no face, no clothing, no details. Just a near-human silhouette made of smudged grayscale, like a sketch someone had erased and redrawn repeatedly. The technician froze the image. Zoomed in, the shape leaned slightly forward, as if observing them, as if studying the people in the room, trying to decide which parts of them it needed. The technician immediately closed the file. Then he called Graves. When he showed him the image, Graves reacted the exact same way Elena had. He stepped back and stared at the corner of the room, the same corner she had pointed at days earlier. Then the technician said something that chilled him. That figure, the system didn't register as a person. What do you mean? The facial recognition flagged 3 anomalies. 1, it has no thermal signature. 2, it casts a shadow but reflects no light. 3, the software tried to match its shape to 3 different people in the room. You, her, and someone else. Graves slowly turned. Someone else. The technician nodded. Someone who wasn't there. Someone not in the database. Someone the system labeled as unclassifiable. This was the first time Graves felt genuine fear, not for the case, but for himself. Because if the figure appeared while they were in the room, if the software detected it mimicking multiple people, if it left no thermal trace, then Elena wasn't describing a hallucination. She had been describing exactly what they had unknowingly stood beside, a half-formed shape, watching, learning, choosing, and as Graves stared at the still frame, he finally understood why Elena had said, it wasn't a killer, it was a replacement. Something had been inside that room with them. Not murder, not malice, not chaos. A purpose they still didn't understand. And in that moment, Graves realized why the agents had confiscated the interview, why Elena had been taken, why the detectives were banned from discussing her testimony. They weren't covering up a crime. They were covering up something unfinished, something still forming, something that might not be confined to one crime scene, or one house, or one witness, something that had already entered the police department and stood behind him. The suppressed file. Detective Graves stayed awake the entire night after seeing the figure in the reflection, not because of what it looked like, but because of what it didn't look like. No eyes, no mouth, no posture, no identifiable features. Nothing that said human, but nothing that said inhuman either. It was blank, a placeholder, a template waiting to be filled. The next morning, Graves went to the precinct early. He didn't tell anyone about the image except Detective Mara Ellis, his partner of 7 years. She was the only person he trusted with something this impossible. When he showed her the frame, she didn't speak at first. She didn't ask if it was edited. She didn't ask if it was a trick of light. Instead, she said, This lines up with what the victim saw. Graves froze. The victim? You never mentioned that. I couldn't. She looked around, making sure they were alone. The statement was removed before it made it into file. What did he say, Mara? She sighed deeply, as if deciding whether to break an oath she never wanted to make. He said the killer looked like someone he knew, someone he couldn't place, someone who looked familiar in one moment and completely wrong in the next. Graves stared at her. Wrong how? She swallowed. He said the face changed shape while he was looking at it. A silence stretched between them. Then Graves whispered. Elena said the same thing. The implications hit them both at once. If the victim saw the killer's face change, if Elena saw something that wasn't a person, and if the reflection showed a figure still forming, then the killer wasn't hiding its identity. It simply didn't have one. Not yet. That afternoon, Graves received an encrypted email from an internal address he didn't recognize. No subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. If you want the truth, check the basement archive. Drawer C-17. The basement archive was rarely used. It housed old cold cases, retired evidence, and dusty boxes no one had touched in decades. Graves and Ellis went there together. The drawer was locked with an electronic code. But when Graves typed in the standard override, the screen flashed green. Inside the drawer was a thin folder, unmarked, unlabeled, no tracking barcode. Inside the folder were only 3 items. A single-page incident report from 1989, a photograph, a transcript labeled testimony, restricted tier. Graves opened the incident report first. The text was faded, but one sentence stood out. Witness claims the suspect resembled multiple individuals at once. His stomach dropped. He showed Ellis. That's the same description, she whispered. Then they looked at the photograph. It showed a crime scene from 1989. A small living room, a broken lamp, a chair turned over, and behind the overturned chair, a blurred shadow. The shape was identical to the figure in the interview room reflection. Graves felt a wave of nausea. It's the same thing, he said. Whatever Elena saw, it's been here before. Ellis opened the last document, the restricted testimony. The transcript was only half a page long. The rest had been violently removed. Not redacted, not blacked out, torn out. Only the first few lines remained. I don't know what it was. It looked almost like a person but kept shifting, like it couldn't decide what face to wear. It stood still at first, watching me, studying me. Then it started to copy. The transcript ended there, as if someone had ripped the page away in a panic. Graves felt chills crawl up his spine. "This isn't a killer," he said softly. "It's something else." Ellis nodded slowly. "Something that uses people, learns from them, becomes them." Graves rubbed his forehead, and it's been doing this for decades. Before they could discuss further, motion sensors clicked on overhead. They weren't alone. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the basement. Slow, even, deliberate. Graves and Ellis instinctively stepped back from the drawer. The footsteps grew louder. They turned the corner and froze. It was the captain, but his expression was wrong. His face didn't move naturally. His eyes tracked them separately, as if calibrating. His posture had the same uncanny stiffness as the figure in the reflection. And then he spoke, but the voice wasn't his. It was as if someone was imitating a recording of him. The pitch slightly off, the tone mismatched, the cadence stilted. "You were not granted access to that file." Ellis whispered, "That's not the captain." The captain-shaped thing tilted its head, almost curiously. Then it smiled. "Too wide, too slow, too deliberate. Access must be revoked." Graves reached for his gun, but the thing moved faster than human reflex, faster than any real person. It crossed the space in an instant, slamming Graves against the metal drawers. Ellis fired 2 shots. The thing turned its head toward her. Not wounded, not even startled. Its face rippled, literally rippled, as if the skin were a thin sheet being stretched from underneath. It stepped toward her. Graves struggled to stand, yelling, "Ellis, run." The thing lunged, but then the basement lights flickered, buzzed, dimmed. The thing froze mid-step. Its limbs twitched. Its posture sagged, glitching like a corrupted video frame. Then everything went dark. When the backup lights came on, the creature was gone. Only a faint outline remained on the concrete floor. A smear of something not liquid, not solid, more like the residue of a shape that never fully materialized. Ellis trembled. What the hell was that? Graves picked up the torn transcript. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even pretending to be one. He swallowed. It was learning. Then he looked at her gravely, and it was wearing the captain's voice. The realization hit them simultaneously. If it could mimic voices, if it could mimic people, if it could enter the station undetected, then the question was no longer who the killer was. The question was, how many people had it already replaced? And worse, which one of them would be next? The file they couldn't destroy. For years, the case sat in a sealed evidence locker, marked with a bright red label. "Do not duplicate Order 7B." The official story claimed the interrogation recordings were corrupted, lost, unusable. But the investigators who handled the transfer told a different story, a story that was never meant to reach the public. 3 technicians tried to erase the footage. 3 different systems. 3 different facilities. All 3 reported the same phenomenon. The file always reappeared. Not copied, not backed up. Reappeared, as if the system was restoring something missing. One technician described it as, like the footage was refusing to die. Another refused to finish his report after watching the first 15 seconds of the video. He submitted his resignation the next day, writing only, "The suspect wasn't alone in that room." The final attempt to destroy it happened in 2017. The digital forensics team tried to burn every physical backup and wipe all servers simultaneously. The fires burned normally. The drive shattered, but the file duplicated itself on a machine that wasn't even connected to the network. The name of that new file has never been explained. Witness_0.mp4. Inside it, the exact same interrogation, except for one difference. At the end of the video, right after the static, there is a single new frame, a blurred figure, standing behind the suspect. Tall, motionless, facing the camera. Encrypted metadata under the frame reads, "She's still looking." The technicians who found it refused to play the file again. They locked it away. But someone leaked it, and now You've heard the story. You know what they tried to bury. And somewhere, the file that refuses to die is waiting for the next viewer. Because the truth about the forbidden witness is simple. You can destroy a case. You can silence detectives. You can erase reports. But you cannot eliminate what was watching them.